began as a digital business card app company in early 2012 and evolved into a networking-centric conference app company in 2013. Then rebooted as part of a move to Austin, Texas in 2014. Now Feathr is the Event Marketing Cloud, a digital suite designed to grow live events such as festivals, conventions, and trade shows. From boosting ticket sales to unlocking new sponsorship revenue to engaging audiences throughout the year, Feathr helps live events fully leverage their online reach. The company returned to Gainesville in mid-2015, yay, and has since grown from 2 to 17 employees, raised $2 million in VC funding, crossed the $100,000 in monthly recurring revenue, and moved into their very own spiffy new office at Innovation Square. If you go to the GAIN website, you can also see these guys who were featured on TV20. Just click on the TV20 icon and you can see them for 5 minutes or so. So Alex is the co-founder and CEO of Feathr, where he oversees the product and support teams. Alex was a newly minted math physics graduate from UF. Then his quarter life crisis led him to academia in favor of the startup grind. Though rarely caught not working, Alex can occasionally be found baking bread while listening to podcasts around the trio of physics, math, and basketball, which will probably form the basis of a book he writes someday. Another little side note is he just bought his first house and he moved in 2 weeks ago. So please join me in welcoming Alex as he tells the story of Feathr.
I want everyone to know I did not write that bio for myself, so I don't actually say those things about myself. So my name is Alexander Levental. I'm CEO, co-founder of Feathr. Like she said, Feathr we currently call ourselves the Event Marketing Cloud, but we're basically digital analytics and marketing for large business-to-business live events. I think the thing that you guys are probably most interested in is kind of where did the company come from, how did the product happen, and how is it that I find myself doing this? Hey Bill, I didn't see you. So I was a physics and math major at the University of Florida from 2010 to 2013. I was a lifelong, in as much as my life actually mattered up until that point, academic. So I wanted a PhD in physics. I wanted to become a professor in physics at some point. And then the summer of my junior year, I was sent to Paris to do research on the experiment that recently announced the detection of gravitational waves. So I was working on a group that worked on that experiment in Paris, and I jokingly say now that I had a kind of capitalistic awakening in Europe at the time. So I was like a closet intellectual academic. The only thing that mattered was intellectual satisfaction and how smart I was and physics and math. And this one kind of random summer was sent by the University of Florida to Paris to do research. They got us an apartment in downtown Paris. They gave us like a 6,000 euro stipend for the summer. And they like wink, wink encouraged us, don't work super hard at your university, travel, kind of see Europe, see other institutions, go meet other people. So there were about 14 or 15 of us who went over to like visit each other, kind of get an idea of the global experience of academia. And I was there, and I just like realized for the first time how good food and steak and bread and wine taste and like how nice travel is, which I had previously like never afforded to myself. I'm like, I'll eat chalk and paper if I can just like stay 15 more minutes in a textbook. And I came back and I just realized if I choose the course of academia, I'm gonna be stuck in that life for at least the next 10 years. Like you don't start your life as a professor until you're 35 or something. So with this newfound understanding of the world and all kinds of questions, I was raised by, my mom was a super hippie artist, so I had like no idea of what the real American dream was or how to approach it or how is it that one becomes an entrepreneur or owns a business. I had this friend, Aiden Augustine, who most of you probably know or have heard about, and he was kind of interested in doing this startup thing. He had come back from his own internship. He wanted to make an app, do a thing. The comedy of his story is he was doing an internship in San Francisco, and he comes back and realizes, hey, everyone in San Francisco is much dumber than I thought they were going to be. He's like, you just have this perspective like all these Stanford grads are like the smartest, most creative, most entrepreneurial people in the world, and Aiden and I are both afflicted with like overwhelming arrogance. He goes over there and comes back and says, they're a lot dumber than I thought. I'm smarter than those people, so I should be one of those people, right? I should make an app and I should do a thing. And I told him at the time, and I really enjoy repeating this now, that I was 99.99% sure that Feathr was going to fail, because all startups fail, particularly those run by 20-year-olds and 21-year-olds. But I was curious to kind of explore the landscape of startups, because it was a buzzword that was in culture, and I was like, if I decide to do something, startups could be that thing. What does this actually mean? What is the landscape of startups like? So I joined as a software developer. This was kind of like mid to late 2012, so they'd been doing the business card for digital networking, digital business cards for professional networking thing for about 6 to 8 months at the time. And my quid pro quo with Aiden was, I'll kind of watch how Feathr fails, and in exchange for that, I'll work for nothing and I will bust my ass to do whatever it is that you need to be done. And so he said, at the time, we really need a mobile application developer. They didn't have anyone that knew how to program for iPhones. I didn't know how to do that either, but I was, again, arrogant enough to think that I could teach myself how to do it at a relatively quick pace. Started as an iOS developer in kind of that first phase of Feathr. Sure enough, the 2, 3, 4 months that I was there doing that, Feathr was failing in all of the ways that you would imagine very early company kind of run and populated by children would and should fail. And for whatever reason, just like over the course of those 4 months, I became more actively and emotionally invested and competitive about Feathr than I thought I would. The real thing that actually happened was I'm a very argumentative person. I tend to enjoy argument and debate. So is Aiden, and he and I started debating a lot. And I kind of had some kind of gut reaction about like, I feel like this process or this function or this thing could be done a little bit better, could be researched a little bit better, but really I just wanted to argue with Aiden. So I started reading a bunch of startup books to have better vocabulary in my arguments with Aiden, right? I just like wanted more empirical support for how smart I was and how correct I was about everything. Well, I was accidentally learning was like, hey, this is how you should build a business, and this is how you should test your product, and this is what an MVP is, and this is how you do customer development. But that was really just ancillary to wanting to be smarter and sound smarter. Near the kind of the end of the lifeline of this digital business card professional networking app, because there was no business model, there was no price point, it was like the canonical, hey, I'm going to do something cool and monetize through advertisement later, because who cares about revenue? What you care about is hype and attention and technology, and I'm Steve Jobs, or I'm Steve Jobs reincarnate, and because I can think of a really good product, the meritocracy of capitalism will ensure that I am successful. That's actually not how it works, and so we were running out of money, and we kind of had no, few threads to pull on. Early 2013, it was actually late 2012, TEDxUF came up to us, and they kind of knew who we were because Feathr had some brand, had some personality, and they said, okay, if you build us an app that is roughly what you guys have kind of described and showed pictures of, but put TEDxUF on the app icon, put the labeling as TEDx, we'll give you guys $1,000. And so this was the first $1,000 that anyone had ever offered us. So we're like, yeah, absolutely, we'll do that. So we spent 6 weeks and we had to learn all of these things. How do you kind of custom build an application, label it with TEDx stuff, publish it such that TEDx branding is represented. Did that really, really quickly. It was some component of success and failure, but the app was out and people used it and it functioned the way that it should have functioned. And then the Office of Technology Licensing, the kind of administrative arm of the people who run the Innovation Hub where we were, knew that we were doing this. They heard that we were doing this. They had their own conference 2 or 3 months after that. And so I think their kind of internal reaction was like, oh, this is cute. There's a Gainesville company that makes app for conferences. If you put the schedule, the agenda of the event, and kind of the list of the exhibitors and speakers in it, we'll give you guys $2,500. And again, we're like, fantastic. We've 2.5x revenue in 3 months. So we're at exponential growth. And what we realized was like, because we're like literally 20 and 22 and shitheads who don't know anything, we had discovered for the first time, a lot of business card exchange happens at events, right? Conferences and trade shows. This is where a significant amount of professional networking happens. And so we had this perspective, if we could solve this problem of digital business card exchange within the context of kind of like siloed conference or trade show, maybe we could learn enough about the product, the space, the usage to eventually abstract out of that. So we went into this experiment thinking, we'll do a few conferences, we'll make some money, it'll build up some traction, we'll learn something about the product and interaction and development, HR, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually we'll sort of apply those problem-solving techniques to the larger problem of ad hoc professional networking in the world, and we'll go back to being LinkedIn for mobile or something. That is not what happened. We just ended up going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole of events. So we kind of started a genuine customer development lifecycle because we were trying to sell people things. People would say no, we would ask why, they would tell us why, and so we would respond to that. And they didn't really care about the networking. They cared about, can I see my schedule? Can I see my exhibitors? Can I see my sponsors? Can these people kind of request meetings with each other? Can I use this to highlight or promote a particular sponsor exhibitor? For about a year and a half, 2 years in Gainesville in the Innovation Hub, we just went deeper and deeper down this path. On the backs of that idea, white-labeled networking apps for conferences and trade shows, we raised our first kind of legitimate sum of money. We raised 150 grand from angel investors in Tampa. And that was the company that we kind of set out building. And it was during this period of time that I went from being passive observer or active observer to like genuinely competitive. And so for that product, at some point during that, I became the CTO. So Aiden and I are both very nerdy, but I'm the slightly more technical nerd. And so I kind of led the product and development team for that product. Did that for a year and a half-ish, 2 years here in Gainesville, grew the team to about 9 people. I think over the year and a half that we did that, we probably had 250 grand in trailing revenue for that period of time, which wasn't bad. It was a significant improvement over 0 for the product before that. But about 18 months into it, Aiden and I kind of start coming to terms with the reality of that business not being perfect either. So one thing that was hugely important in that is we didn't understand the competitive landscape of that product category in 2012 and 2013. So we thought we had invented this like genius idea. Hey, let's make custom branded event applications for conferences and trade shows. Turns out there had already been companies that had raised 15, 20 million bucks, companies that had been acquired for 15, 20 million bucks that were at that point 4 or 5 years old that were gearing up for their 3rd or 4th venture capital round for exactly that product. And around this time, 2014, mid-2014, that we're realizing this, some piece of content was produced called the Event App Bible that we were listed in, and it kind of had a matrix of us and our features versus other companies and other features. I think there were 93 or 96 other vendors just in that piece of content alone. And that was like the ones that were worth mentioning, not the little kind of brick and mortar 1-2 person app development shops. So mid-2014, Aiden and I start coming to terms with this reality, kind of surveying the landscape of what we had done and what we had accomplished, every single mistake that we had made. We had made a bunch of mistakes about who we had hired, how we had communicated with them, how we were growing the company. And I think ultimately what we decided was we think we could scale this to be kind of a profitable small business. We had done 250 grand in revenue in 18 months. We could kind of see on the horizon, I feel like I could get this to $1 million, $1.5 million over 2-3 years. And if we do it with a small enough team and we could potentially pay ourselves a nice living wage in Gainesville, and that would be kind of a fun experience. But we were arrogant and narcissistic enough to want more than that, right? Like we want venture capital backed, explosive growth, billion-dollar startup aspirations, and the idea of kind of profitable small business was not that enticing to us. So we kind of used that as an opportunity to evaluate our business and our business model and our market category, and we started picking up on some trends for what we had experienced selling. So we had noticed when we were selling, people kept asking us kind of similar questions, right? They would ask us, hey, can I use this app to get more attendees, right? To sell more tickets to whatever my event is? Can I use this app to generate more sponsorship or exhibitor revenue, right? Can I kind of sell promoted placements or push notifications or something within the app? Can I somehow use this app to increase engagement with my attendees kind of outside the 2 to 3 days of the event, right? This is a problem for the event space, particularly large revenue generating events. Like I put all this work into getting all these people together. I don't want to just talk to them for 2 or 3 days when they're on site. I'd like to continue talking to them and continue selling them stuff. And for a while, we tried answering those questions with the application, right? We were like, oh, we'll build this feature, we'll do this, sponsored push notifications, promoted exhibitor highlighting. And then when this kind of Austin distraction happened, really it was a competition. I'll backpedal a little bit and say, at some point, 2014, Aiden and I, in the way that most good entrepreneurs do, we found a way to blame everyone else but ourselves for the kind of like ineffectiveness of our company. And so we kind of like translated some of that blame to Gainesville. We're like, well, maybe if Gainesville were a little bit bigger, or there are more investors, or there are more event organizers, obviously then the world would recognize how smart and wonderful we are and would give us more success and more money. So we started kind of looking around for places to move, found Austin. There's a startup accelerator in Austin called the Capital Factory who runs an annual competition called Move Your Startup to Austin. And they kind of let people apply online, and then they whittle that list down through a series of interviews. They fly you out to Austin, South by Southwest, you pitch on stage. And we were one of those companies, 2014, South by Southwest. We pitched and we won. And so the deal was you get 100 grand investment, kind of 150 grand in services, but you have to move to Austin. Like they won't sign the term sheet for the investment until you show them a personal lease for all of the founders of the company that you're moving to Austin. So this was like March 14th, 2014 that we won. 6 weeks later, Aiden and I were moving into our apartments in Austin. So we like subletted our apartments, fired everyone on the existing Feathr, found places to live, set ourselves up, and we're moving into Austin May 1st, 5th, 2014. And we kind of used that as an opportunity to reboot the company. Mainly we had a brainstorming session that was like, let's think about these questions that people have been asking us: attendee acquisition, exhibitor and sponsorship revenue, increased engagement with events, but pretend we don't have the baggage of this event app company, right? It's like, how would we answer that question today if we just have the landscape of opportunity in front of us rather than this baggage of it's got to fit into a mobile application? And we just kept going back to an app isn't the right way to do it, right? I would do it with Facebook, and I would do it with display advertising and Google and emails and landing pages and all of these kind of marketing activities and analytics that really had nothing to do with mobile apps. And so we used that opportunity, a little bit of cash, a little bit of clarity and distance from what we had been doing before, to say, okay, let's kind of pivot again. And so the company that we came up with our own creativity and insight and some investors, advisors, people that we had met, was this idea that we're working on now, which is a marketing and analytics platform for events. So what we do now is we integrate with the websites, emails, marketing campaigns of primarily large B2B events. So conferences that are kind of 1,000 people plus, trade shows that are 20,000 people plus. And we do all the digital analytics of who's visiting the websites, who's opening the emails, who's interacting with the marketing campaigns, who's registering, who's not registering, why are they not registering, what are the kind of different behavioral characteristics about those things, tracking some data about them, right? Like this person has visited 10 times, this person has visited 5 times, but that kind of on a more aggregated scale. So for this particular event, you have 3,760 people who have visited 5 times or more in the last 2 weeks. And then we kind of have these functions or activation tools for marketing and for monetization. So marketing is basically, hey, I have these users, I have these people cookied and tracked and segmented. Now I want to run digital marketing campaigns to get them to come back to the event website, or to open this email, or to interact with this digital advertising campaign because I want to sell them something, or promote a different event, or get them to subscribe to this, or buy a ticket, or buy a more expensive ticket. That one is, I would say, is relatively standard. It's just us doing a kind of narrow niche of marketing for this market, for the event market. It turns out that the event industry is gigantic. So one of the very often quoted numbers is that in 2013 there were globally $535 billion spent organizing only professional events. So that's not even revenue inclusive, that's just like expenditure on the organization of professional events. So all of these things kind of came together where we'd been doing events for like 2 years randomly. Turns out it's a very valuable market that's kind of underserved by technology. We thought we kind of had identified this open opportunity in the market that no one was really filling very well. And so we started on that kind of like mid to late 2014. We onboarded our first customer November 2014, and we tried to do like a hard 180-degree turn from every mistake that we had made with the previous company. So one of the most entertaining ones is we wasted a lot of time with old Feathr building product and then trying to sell it. So we kind of had this confusion about how customer development works, wherein we would say, we think we know the answer to the problem that the industry has. Let's build it. And once it's ready enough, let's try and give it to them and sell it to them and see if they'll buy it. That ends up being really painful because if nobody buys it, you just wasted 1 month or 3 months or 6 months building a product that nobody wants. and you are no more wise for that experience because you haven't been talking to a customer. Nobody has been telling you why they refuse to buy it. And so what we did this time was literally the exact opposite. We built effectively nothing. So we designed, thought of the solution that we wanted. I spent about 2 to 3 days, downloaded a template of like a web app from the internet, changed out some pictures to make it look like Feathr. I did some trickery to make it seem like it was working. It did not work at all. It was completely fake. And then Aiden and I flew to New York for like a week and a half. We were there. We got some intros from advisors and people we had relationships with in the industry. And we went on like a tour, a sales pitch tour of these companies, being like, hey, here's the product that we've built. Here's what it does. We went through a very, very choreographed demo of like, we click this and this happens, and then isn't this fantastic? Literally no other buttons in that worked, but we were the only ones that had control of the computer and what we were communicating. And so we had kind of an internal goal of, okay, if we can get 5 events at like a couple grand a pop, that would justify spending the next 2 or 3 months like digging a little bit deeper. From that trip, we ended up signing like 12 events for 60 grand. So it was significantly easier of a sale off less work than we had ever experienced before. They signed $8,000, $12,000 contracts without ever touching a product that worked. So they only saw a demonstration of a product that didn't work. Kind of on the plane ride back is when I actually started building the product. So it was that, like the next 2 weeks was 20-hour days of attempting to build a product that worked. But even then, kind of retaining this internal commitment to don't waste time building something that nobody wants to buy, and would kind of intelligently engineer these moments. I don't know how intelligently, but would engineer these moments of, I think when somebody logs in, you know, the first thing that they're going to do is they're going to click this and they're going to go here and they're going to do this. And so I would build only those 3 things. And then I would wait for emails for people complaining about stuff that didn't work. So they'd send an email like, oh, I tried to click this, nothing happened. And I'd politely respond like, oh, let me look into that. And then I was like, oh, I see what it is. I'll let you know when it's fixed. In reality, it's nothing worked because it didn't exist. And we learned a lot because the pitch that we gave ended up being kind of meaningfully different from the product that we built, because we had stuff that we thought was going to be really, really important. That was a huge part of our pitch. Nobody ever complained about, right? Like nobody ever sent an email that said this thing doesn't work, because they never clicked it because they didn't care and it wasn't important. And so I just removed it. I've never heard a peep about it, right? Like these are people still interact with, still customers. Nobody has ever said like, oh, you remember that dynamic creative optimization thing you guys saw? Like, never came up. So did that, kind of ran that pilot, just Aiden and me, 2 hours a night, like Red Bull, manually updating things. So I didn't even make the app work. What I did was I connected it to a database so that Aiden and I could manually update numbers in the database that would reflect like in the app when they logged in. This would be like Mark Zuckerberg, like he would get a Post-it that says somebody wants to post this on your wall, goes into the database and types in what somebody posted on your wall. Like this was effectively what we were doing for 2 or 3 months. And then we just wanted to repeat it again. So we're like, okay, we kind of got our feet steady, we understand this process, let's see if we can do it again. 12 events, roughly kind of 60 grand with a little bit more experience, a little bit more knowledge. And it like blew up by another kind of factor of 3. So we were targeting 12 events, we ended up getting like 36 or something in 2 weeks. We basically went to the same customers, and careful marketing language said, hey, we're thinking about opening up a second phase of the pilot. Do you have any events that would be interested? And we had a couple of customers who, like, one immediately went from 2 to 9. The other, like, without asking us, they're like, yeah, I want this, and this event, and I just told my digital team to put the pixel on the website, so can you set these events up for us? Now we had another one that went from like 4 to 19, right? Like their entire North American portfolio. And it was exactly, like they didn't even ask us if they could. That was just what they did. We still were not convinced, right? We had learned very, very strong lessons about don't over-index on things that could be motivated by your bias, by kind of like wanting to see rose petals through thorns. And so still Aiden and me kind of servicing these 36 events completely by ourselves, completely manual processes. And then it was like March to April, so coming up on about a year that we've been in Austin, it's me and Aiden. We're starting to think, hey, we may be onto something. We might have found some product market fit that works. We kind of think that we can scale this. We think that there might be a product here. And randomly in late March, got an email from the chief digital officer of the largest exhibition organizer in the world. It's a company called Reed Exhibitions. It's like a $2 billion, $2.5 billion revenue company. They run 500-ish trade shows a year. And they forwarded me an email thread that was, hey, we've kind of had some internal conversations on what it would be like rolling out Feathr across the entire company. Can you give us some feedback on what that would be like? They had no idea we were only 2 people at the time, by the way. We used to do this thing where like Aiden would respond to an email and be like, let me talk to the development department about that. And the development department was sitting right next to him at the desk. But we would kind of do that a little bit. So they never really asked. I mean, they certainly knew that we were young. We did not like lie about having 30 employees. But so they asked about this, and we kind of ended up working with them. First deal was roughly 20-25% of their portfolio. And it was at that point that we're like, okay, maybe we really were onto something that we should start scaling. And this is when kind of Gainesville reemerges in the picture. So we were in Austin for a year. Austin was a great, kind of fantastic city to be a particular age at a particular time. And we happened to be in that sweet spot of like, you have some amount of money because you have a job, you're post-college, but you don't really want children or to not like kill your liver yet. So Austin is a great place to be. But it was in this kind of uncanny valley of optimization for our business. So Austin kind of has more event organization collateral than Gainesville, but significantly less so than where almost all of our customers are, which is the Northeast. So all of these companies that organize conferences, trade shows are in Maryland, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. For some reason, a lot of them are in Connecticut. And Austin really has South by Southwest and not very much more, because a lot of these companies, they're not next to the venue. They operate someplace that's kind of cheap to be, and they have access to employees and people. They just like organize all over the world. Austin was sort of a little bit less expensive than places like New York and San Francisco for talent, but significantly more expensive than a place that we were comfortable with like Gainesville, right? Particularly because Austin, you're now competing with Facebook and Dropbox and Google and Box and all the companies that are there for not that many more people than Gainesville, right? There's 100x the competition for 4x the people. So when we were kind of thinking, we have a product that we want to scale, we have a company that we think we might actually have some legs behind it, where do we want to do this? And for us, the decision ended up being between Gainesville and New York, that we were either going to move the company full bore to New York, or we were going to move the company full bore to Gainesville. And we ended up choosing Gainesville relatively quickly because we realized planes are a lot cheaper than people. Kind of like you run the math and it's like incredibly obvious. Aiden and I could fly back and forth to New York 3 times a month. That's like still less than the price difference for one developer between Gainesville and New York. Like 6 flights or like 3 round trip tickets plus some hotel plus some food is like $5-6 grand a month for 2 people, right? That's the difference between one single developer between Gainesville and New York. And so it became really obvious. So we moved back to Gainesville May of 2015 as 2 people, hired our first developer shortly thereafter. We're 3 employees through basically a year ago right now, sometime a year ago right now, we hired number 4. Decided to raise money probably 4 weeks before today last year. So 11-ish months ago, we decided to raise money. Ended up because of customer portfolio that we had, advisors that we had, other kind of friends and kind of reception of the industry, in it's exceptionally easy time that we didn't deserve raising money. So we ended up raising $2 million, $2.1 million in venture capital funding that was kind of halfway split between strategic investors and venture capital investors. So some of our customers, I can't say which ones because if the other ones see this, they'll get upset, but some of our customers and some other of the largest vendors in the industry are investors in us, and then we also have kind of traditional venture capital money. Some people know about, so Richard Malloy from Florida Gulf Shore Capital, who is here around the industry and the city a lot and is invested in Peoria, Eventplicity, Admiral. They just announced a few. He is an investor in us. A couple Arsenal Venture Partners are investors in Fracture and maybe some other ones in Gainesville that I may or may not know about. And then a couple of random ones, one in Austin, one in Miami. and then a couple of angels here and there. So we closed on that funding right around the new year, so about 7-ish months ago. It was like late January, early February. And in the last year, we have gone from, so a year ago today, we were about 3 people. Number 18 starts on Monday. As she said, we surpassed some crazy. Now, there was one month that we invoiced 200 grand. I think that was July or June that we invoiced 200 grand. And we're just kind of now in this phase. I think Aiden and I have now gotten to this point, or Feathr has gotten to this point that we had previously struggled to get out of, which is finding product market fit. I think I can confidently say we've found a problem and a solution that kind of has some fit. And for us now, the problems of the last 6 months have not been like, hey, how do I design a product that I can sell? It's all of these problems that we were like too kind of childish to understand is how do I hire people? How do I train people? How do I manage effectively? What does communication mean? When people are upset at each other, how do you handle that? What do you do with your space? What the hell is accounting? Accounting has been awful to deal with over the last 8 months. And also kind of embracing our sort of position in the industry and trying to live up to that and trying to like identify a culture. What do we think has actually been responsible for the last 6 to 12 months of success or positivity, and how do we make sure we don't lose track of that or actually kind of index on that correctly when hiring people and training people, and kind of, yeah, how do we grow? And I think Gainesville has kind of wrapped into that because every kind of assumption that we had about how Gainesville would be as a home base for us has met or exceeded our expectations. We've imported 4 or 5 people into Gainesville, like hired people from Miami, Austin, Bradenton, I don't know where that is, that's somewhere. And kind of like places and moved them to Gainesville. Some that had a previous affiliation either went to the university or knew or like went to FSU, but then 2 or 3 people who had no previous affiliation were comfortable moving to Gainesville, and that was, we completely did not expect that. Plus all the other stuff like the university and stuff like Gain and the Innovation Hub. We chose to move back to Gainesville because we kind of figured this was a system that we had some conception of how to be successful in versus New York or San Francisco. We don't really have a conception of how to be successful in. And we, I think, are here for the relatively long haul, at least 3 more years. I have a Pinterest board of like all the Caribbean islands that I want. And I'm hoping to get to those by like 30 or early 30s. No, but probably I'd say I can kind of squint and see the next 3 years in Gainesville. I don't know size of the company, kind of direction that we're going to take. We want a smaller company, so I don't necessarily want to scale and do this again and go from 20 to 50 in the next year. I kind of want to go from 20 to 30 in the next year, but then understand like who are those people and what do they do and how do you enable them to do what they need to do without a lot of bureaucracy and overhead and kind of pay them appropriately such that we don't need to start worrying about middle management and upper management and all of those things that make work painful. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's where we are. I don't know if I'm supposed to open it up for questions.
That was very entertaining. It's not working again.
It's a small room. I mean,
Yeah, I can talk louder.
It's for the
I
video.
have a question for you.
Sure.
You mentioned at the beginning some like music and festival, but I kind of didn't hear much reference to that. It seems like you've kind of zeroed in on B2B.
Yeah, so I would say probably 90% of our business is B2B, and we have a handful of B2C events. Of that 10%, probably 90% of that is from a particular department at one of our customers. So New York Comic Con, Chicago Comic Con, a lot of like kind of comic and pop culture events. So they're clients of ours. Outside of them, there's been one music festival in LA, car convention somewhere. I've lost track of where the events are. But
I noticed you're going to be exhibiting at X Live coming
Yes.
up in December.
Yes, yeah.
Is that in an effort maybe to
Yes.
improve, or do you see an opportunity?
Exactly right. So the essential algorithm for whether or not the product works and the business model works is it a live event that happens on a particular day that sells tickets and sponsorships, or that deals with tickets and sponsorships. So that is like the basic formula that we do well in. So essentially anything that deals with that kind of works well, because we facilitate both the how do I kind of leverage the data that I have about the users to get more tickets. Once I have those people and I have that data set, how do I let my sponsors and exhibitors access them digitally? So we have two basically kind of like product functions. Marketing is attendee acquisition. Monetization is we allow the event organizers to sell digital advertising and marketing packages to the sponsors and exhibitors. So in addition to selling them a booth and a tent and a banner and a logo on the wall, they could say, hey, do you want to run a Facebook campaign or a Google campaign against all of the registered attendees, or against, if it's a super big trade show, against all of the registered attendees who have expressed interest in like technology security, if I'm a sort of general security conference. So they can, so if you paid 100 grand for your booth, you want to pay 10 grand for this digital media sponsorship. And so anything that kind of deals with that, so sports, music festivals, concerts, in principle all that works. We've just kind of focused on digging deeper and deeper into the customers that we have.
Do you take a percentage of that?
No. We tried for a while. We had these very like altruistic kind of business model goals of like, hey, only pay for performance. So we'll kind of track these conversions and you'll pay us $40 or something, some fraction of your ticket price conversions. And while that sounds really good, what ended up happening is people are like, what? How much does it cost, right? It's like, I have a budget, I have 10 grand, does it cost 10 grand or does it cost more or less? And so we very much wanted to do that, but we just ended up, it's a relatively straightforward SaaS model, so they pay monthly fee for kind of access to the platform, and then we take a percentage on the media arbitrage. So we're kind of like a broker for buying digital media. So in one of our events, it's like, oh, I want to run a Facebook and a Google and an OpenX and a Rubicon and a Twitter campaign. We programmatically buy that media and then do the reporting and analytics and optimization of that. And so if Twitter charges us $1,000, or like all of those together charge us $1,000, we'll charge them $1,500.
Well, I have another question.
Sure.
I want to know what your experience was like in the incubator in Austin. And the second part of that is, do you think that Gainesville is right to have an accelerator here to support the entrepreneurial community that we have?
So you want like the political answer or the honest one?
I want the honest one.
Okay. So there were pros and cons, and I think the pros were that accelerator did a good job of positioning itself as kind of the mecca of tech in Austin. So they were really, really aggressive about, around South by Southwest. I forget what it was called, but they had like a startup fair, which was in their office space and in the hotel atrium that the building was in. This kind of giant, 10,000 people would come through over one night. The guy who was kind of like the director of the accelerator, Josh Baer, lifelong Austin entrepreneur, had started and exited 3 companies there, and he kind of had relationships. They did a really good job of funneling attention through the Capital Factory. So when Obama went to Austin one time, he went to the Capital Factory. Ted Cruz, when he went to Austin to kind of learn about startups and STEM, he went to the Capital Factory. So they did a very good job kind of positioning themselves that way. And in general, there was kind of more aggregate opportunity because there were people there, right? If you are interested in self-promotion or you're good at it, there were just more opportunities to kind of latch onto stuff like that. What was not particularly productive was they had kind of rolling admissions. They were not, we have our winter class, spring class, fall class. They were, you're in for as long as you want, and you kind of never matriculate out. You can leave, but you're still a Capital Factory company, and there's some nice kind of like personality ethos around that, but really what that meant is there was not very much structure around, okay, you're here, week 1 is your lesson about this, week 2 is your lesson about this, week 4 you have this kind of introductory investor pitch, or it was just like, hey, here's some resources, here's some people, here's some stuff, have at it. And if you did well, then they would kind of meritocratically reappropriate attention to you. And Aiden and I sort of didn't do well in that environment for a couple of reasons. One, we went there and we're like, this is the 3rd thing that we're doing. We're super old now, we're like 25. And so if we don't make it now, we're never gonna make it. And so we were very much like heads down, I'm doing work, I'm talking to customers and people, et cetera, et cetera. We did not spend a lot of time on self-promotion. And therefore, like we had some pretty good quarters and months the time that we were there, and we told people about it. Like we would, go to the stuff that we had to go to, and they were just like understandably cynical about it. They're like, oh, sure, great. But because we didn't spend a lot of time kind of like developing the hype of Austin, which is very much what they got feedback for. So I would say I am an advocate of accelerators and incubators, mainly because I think startup equity is effectively worthless. And if you can find someone who will give you any amount of money and any amount of attention and any amount of resources for paper that is worthless, right, for 2%, 6% of your company, you should do it, because you should do whatever you can do to go from zero to something. But what I would have done, and we experienced this frustration here in Gainesville as well, there's not a lot of like, I'm investing time to learn about your business. There are not very many more Googles out there or Facebooks out there, right? The businesses that people are starting, and like ours is not like, hey, I think it'd be good if people could share pictures with each other, such that you can talk to an investor or an advisor and they'll give you some feedback like, that might be interesting, look into this and then you'll be all right, right? It's really, really specific and narrow. It's like independent, profit generating, non-membership association affiliated events, and we're doing the marketing and monetization of that. Like that takes time to dig deep and be like, okay, I get it. Here's how their budgets are stratified, and here are the decision makers, and here how you should go after them. And it's really hard to get feedback like that, which we got from our advisors, right? We people we picked from the industry, gave them 1-2% more of the company, and said, okay, I can pester you with questions, and you can give me intros and advice. That was phenomenally helpful. And if there's a way for Gainesville to emulate that, either people with time or a broad enough kind of distribution of expertise to say, hey, I don't know anything about like dog psychiatry drugs, but here's somebody who might, and they'll take some time, right, significant time, in exchange for equity or something, or points to like really dig deep and give you intros and give you feedback. That would be incredibly, incredibly helpful.
So Alice, can you expand a little bit more on that? Because I think a lot of young people are really reluctant to give up equity for advice. They think they need to get money. So can you expand a little bit on how that worked? How many people, what was the process, and how did you make the decision that these were the right people and they were really going to create value for the company?
So the single smartest thing that Aiden and I ever did is we gave up basically a third of our company to 2 people. So right around the time that we moved to Austin, we met these 2 guys, Marco Ghiberti and Jay Weintraub. And we just met them through like random happenstance in the industry. We're at one event, met one. The other guy was cold call from one of our salespeople trying to sell them an app because he's an event organizer. And he just like asked some questions, got referred to me as the CTO. And I had like a 2-hour phone conversation with them. We just kind of ended up like flirting and digging deeper on that relationship. And they're these 2 guys who are both kind of independently wealthy in the event space, started event and media companies, sold them to these independent event organizers, and are now kind of wealthy enough to be angel and venture capital investors. And they were in this position where, hey, we're tired of our spray and pray angel investment. We want to really like dig deep in a company and like, actually kind of make our resources available. But I don't want 2% of a company, I want 40% of a company because of that, because I have this much experience, I have this much worth and value, and I don't just want to do like write $20,000, $25,000 checks a year. And it was like genuine flirtatious chemistry. Jay is very much like me. He's kind of like neurotic tech person. Marco is very much like Aiden, kind of broad-shouldered, tall, charismatic businessman. And we had kind of good conversations with each other, had similar opinions about industry and tech and space. They were very open and upfront and said, we're really only interested in this for half of the company. We like you and we believe in you, but it's just like the economics for us don't work out. And I think we just believed in that relationship enough to say, let's wing it. Right? We kind of believe in them enough that it would be worthwhile. It's the single smartest, best decision we have ever made. Like they deserve, if there was a good calculator for determining who gets credit for what, they deserve 95% of the credit for all of our success, because they took a risk on Aiden and me for being able to be like the day-to-day activators of their intelligence and idea and relationships. They gave us intros to people we like don't deserve to have. This one like occasionally recenters me. the chief information officer, chief digital officer of a company called Freeman, which is based in Dallas. They're the largest events company in the world. He's nodding his head because he knows Freeman. Their chief digital officer was CIO of FedEx Kinko's for like 6 years. So it's like a $40 billion market cap company or whatever FedEx Kinko's is. Like he will pick up the phone when I call, right? I've had to call him before to ask him some questions, deal with paperwork, and like that's a relationship I only have because of Marco, right? Because he invested his life into building positive relationships with these people and took a risk to introduce me and Aiden. That is worth so much more than 10 grand or 15 grand or 20 grand that I would have charged him. And again, what I would say to those people, and I say this all the time when it comes up, your company is worthless, right? However you compute the expectation value of the equity in your company, it is effectively worthless. And if you can get anything for it, that's a positive first step, right? You don't go from like 0 to 100, right? Can you get from 0 to 5? Can you get from 5 to 10? And if you can get someone to give you anything for your company, attention, advice, some amount of money, 5 grand, 10 grand, particularly young people, this is a personal frustration of mine, is you have your entire life to figure out how to make money, right? People say all these things, you make your mistakes in your 20s, or you do nothing in your 20s, make your mistakes in your 30s, make your money in your 40s, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? If you can be 2-3 years ahead of schedule on that, like you're doing fantastic, right? Who cares the professional currency of building a successful organization and doing anything with a company in your 20s and your 30s is so much more valuable than like, oh, I really think my made up company is worth 600 grand instead of 500 grand. So I want, to give you 3% instead of 3.5%.
So, sorry, just a follow-on question. The money you got from the Tampa folks in the Capital Factory, were those non-dilutive or dilutive? Were those equity investments?
The first one was dilutive. It was a straight priced equity round. The Capital Factory one was a convertible note. They got a crazy good deal because they converted as a part of this round, and they had like is 18-month term, $3 million cap, 20% discount, 8% simple interest. So they ended up basically getting a 50% discount on the shares for this round. And again, the people told us, like when we were going to the Capital Factory, people were like, hey, the terms on this note are not that great. They were not like exorbitantly bad, but they're like, these are pretty bad terms for a convertible note. And I was like, I don't care. It's fake. The company's a week away from dying. I think it's pretty bad that you're giving me 100 grand. And it's fine. Like Aiden and I have these conversations all the time. Like I can't visualize myself 5 years from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now going like, man, we sold Feathr and I got 4 million instead of 6.7. Like, it really eats me. Like that's not what happens, right? What eats you is like, hey, I tried to do this and it failed. And if I had done these 18 things differently, would it have succeeded? I'm kind of like more afraid of that moment than I am of like, I'm only doing pretty well. What's up?
So can I kind of piggyback on her question about the Austin incubator or accelerator and ask the same about your experience here? Because you were in the hub, right?
Yes.
How was your experience in the hub?
I've said this on the feedback surveys to them, and we've kind of talked about this. As a introductory space and environment, it's fantastic. If you think about the hub like co-working space and kind of an introduction into being a business, it's wonderful. The space is great, the amenities are great, the utilities are great. There are people, there's an environment to be in, there are other kind of companies happening, and however they're distributed, you'll find 1 or 2 people who you kind of have some rapport with, even if it's personal, right? Like that can help somebody that you can kind of see and is going through something similar, and you can share a beer occasionally. As a kind of business building partner, it's not that great, but it's not that great not for anything that the hub is doing. It's just really, really hard for them to know what to say to somebody who's trying to build an event marketing platform, right? They're like and it's fine, but they kind of cap out at the level of expertise that they can give, which is like, hey, you should, HR is super important, right? The people that you hire and culture and all that stuff is super important. You can only say that so many times over 2 years. And at this point, like I know, I believe it. Now what I need to know is like, if I have this group, how do I structure a reseller agreement and what is a typical amount of commission? And like there's a degree of problem solving that they can't really help with. so for us, we kind of, I think, naturally matured out of it. So what I tell people when they ask about the hub is, particularly if you need a place to make some mistakes, to learn really, really foundational business building lessons, like how do I register my business, what are investors and where do they exist, and how do you talk to them, the hub can be really good, but if you have the knack and have the desire, relatively quickly you'll kind of mature out of that. You'll have more complicated questions than they can answer.
So I have another question.
Sure.
So why did you call the company Feathr?
Again, you want the real answer or you want the political answer?
Real answer.
So, okay, the political answer is, at the time that we were doing professional networking, we were kind of thinking of branding that was emotive of that, and birds are kind of happy and agile and light, and there was this like phrase that had entered into our consciousness, which was birds of a feather flock together, and we had this idea about like these digital business cards that any one user could have multiple. So you could have like, this is my personal card, this is my, consultancy, this is my, whatever company that I work for, and we kind of, it evoked thoughts of like plumage of a peacock or something, that you have multiple feathers, right? So I'm showing you this feather and you give me your feather, right? That there was this exchange. So that's completely untrue, but that's the practiced answer. The real one is, first name was awful. It was like RenCard or CardSync. I can't remember which was, CardSync was the first one. And then it became RenCard, which was like a renaissance of business cards or digital business cards. And then at the time that we just like needed some branding, needed some, like an actual brand that we were building, just kind of developed 3 names that were not randomly picked, but just like what's good, what domain names are available, what sounds cool. And the 3 were like Feathr, Loki, and Halcyon. And I think Loki was like the favorite in the clubhouse. But we ended up picking Feathr because it was kind of less intimidating. Like Loki was what we wanted because we're nerds who like Lord of the Rings and mythology, but we just thought Feathr would kind of play a little bit better. The domain names were cheaper. Thought we could do kind of better SEO and branding with that. And we've since kind of like reverse acronymed into this justification.
So you wanted to say something?
Yeah. So it's going to play right off what you just said. So when the very beginning, and I'm going to talk about the ecosystem here in Gainesville for entrepreneurs, and also I'm going to promote Startup Weekend, which is coming up October 21st. So Aiden was in the Seed Incubator. I'm the entrepreneur resident at Seed, and he worked for a company called CitySync, which was an app designed so that a millennial could pick up their phone and look at it and say, what do I want to do right now, and it would tell them. And there's been a lot of attempts at that, but Aiden was one of the developers there and was really smart. But the founder got a job at Google, so he went. And Aiden was looking for what he was going to do next, went to Startup Weekend in Tallahassee. And Startup Weekend's a competition. On Friday, you pitch an idea. You try to get as many of the developers that are there as you can to work on your idea, and then you work on it all weekend and pitch it on Sunday. Well, Aiden went and pitched his idea, and Toby, who hopefully worked at Group Shark, pitched his idea. And so there was this group of like 8 developers with all their Macs on Toby's team, and there was Aiden and some guy that he brought with him developing all weekend. And so by the end of the weekend, Aiden went to pitch CardSync, and it was amazing. He had this amazing demo with these multiple business cards. And so you could look, and they had the iPhone up on the screen, and you could see, and there was, here's my business card, and then I could swipe this way, and it would be my personal card, and swipe this way. All he had done was create a picture and zoomed in on his iPhone so that when he would swipe the picture, it would move around and look like it was doing that. And I think he came in second to the team that had like all the development. So it was amazing. And now Feathr has grown and is now sponsoring Startup Weekend
For the
this
second
year.
time consecutively.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Aiden is on the organizing team. So there's room for more sponsors, October 21st. If you want to see how some of these things get started at the very beginning, that's where it happens. Startup Weekend, October 21st, here in Gainesville.
So actually, I competed in Startup Weekend in 2013.
Yes.
And won with a different company that was called Waiter. And I don't know if you know this, that company is still alive. So
I didn't know.
there was somebody who was completely random who joined our team. He was older than us, and he had just left a job in industry or something in kind of food service. He was on the team. When we won, he really wanted to do it, and I kind of had to say, no, I'm doing this Feathr thing. This was just distraction, right? The startup weekend was a distraction one weekend for me, and I'm Facebook following that company. They're in Louisiana. It's essentially like food delivery. It's one of those apps where you can kind of order and people will deliver food. But they have, including drivers, something like 200 employees now in Louisiana. Yeah.
Cool.
So there's and Bartender also came out of Startup Weekend.
Yep.
So it's a genuinely kind of good opportunity and experience, and it can cram together a lot of that, like what's a startup, what's a business, how do I build this, into a really, really quick, fun, exciting experience.
And the winner gets to participate in the shootout.
Yes.
So Sunday night, whenever they've determined who the winner is, typically around 10:30, 11 o'clock, I get a phone call. Lee, I made it. And so then they have to stay up practicing because the next day they're up in front of those investors. So.
Which is totally not fair. We ended up pitching against Paracosm.
Yeah, but what a great opportunity.
It was,
right?
yeah, it was fun. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well, we thank you.